I don't know about you guys, but that goat cracks me up every time. So, my name's Rick. I'm one of the pastors here. I want to welcome you to church this morning. I'm glad you are here. Perfect time to start coming to church. We're starting a brand new series today. That series is really going to kind of challenge us all as a community, and it's going to challenge each and every one of us individually. Now, the source of that challenge comes from the book of Leviticus. Some of you kind of just shudder like, I didn't read that one, right? But the book of Leviticus is right in the middle of the first 5 books of the Bible. And that's the first 5 books are called the Torah or the Pentateuch. And I think placement is important because, the Bible wasn't put together by accident. There was a purpose and a plan behind it. So Leviticus is right in the middle of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So these 5 books form the foundation of the entire Old Testament. So it's pretty important. It was really important to the Hebrew people in that time and day and age when they were kind of wandering around, and we'll talk about that. And it was really important to Jesus because he quoted from it all the time. So if it's important to the Hebrew people and it's important to Jesus, maybe might be something we want to look into. Could be a little important to us too. So as we kind of look at this, I think Leviticus could be a real game changer for each and every one of us. For you, for me, for how we relate to God, how we understand the Bible and how we relate to the Bible and how it applies to our lives. So in thinking of it in that way, there's a little thing on the back of your study guide or your program. It's a little spot for notes. And I kind of like to watch because I don't know if you guys are playing on your phone or writing in your notes section on your phone. That's good too. But take some notes because I know that this stuff is not just for you to hear today and then head on out. These notes are important for you, your family, your friends. Could be a coworker, I don't know. But write it down if you get that nudge from God. Maybe he's trying to tell you something, to look something up, to go home and read. And talking about reading the Bible, we put together a study guide. They probably handed you one on the way in, and if you didn't get one, you can grab one on the way out there at the life desk or right here at this first table. But that study guide is set up for the entire series that we're starting today. And it's really good because you can take that home and you can go through it and dig a little deeper into God's Word. And I would really do encourage you to do that. Don't just take my word for it. Dig into God's Word. See what He has to say to you. Use that study guide for your life groups and your home groups, and maybe put together a little study at work or something. Invite somebody to church. I see a few empty chairs, so there's room. You guys can invite your friends. Don't worry about that. We'll buy more chairs. So now if we have to be honest about Leviticus, if we have to really think about Leviticus from our, Christians tend to hide Leviticus kind of way back in the Old Testament, right? It's kind of like that drunk uncle you don't tell anybody about. It's like you want your friends to know about Leviticus, but it's kind of hard to understand. It's difficult. You kind of maybe want to get rid of it, but you can't get rid of it because it's part of the Bible. It's a book of weird laws and rules and even threats even. That's kind of scary. But many critics of Christianity attack Leviticus first. I think they if you pay attention to people and who those people are that are really opposed to Christianity or the Christian worldview, they kind of attack Leviticus because it's the low-hanging fruit, or so they think. I think it's probably because they don't understand it or they haven't read it. So think about that in that way. So let's look at a question. Is Leviticus objectively strange, or is it just the way that we see it? From our modern perspective, Leviticus just reads kind of weird. It's hard to understand, and why anybody would think all those laws were a good idea, we just don't get it. They don't even seem to be based in any kind of reason, really, from our 2019 America, Junction, Missouri perspective. And it's kind of crazy to think about that. Like verses in chapter 12 about cleanliness and uncleanliness when it comes to childbirth. Now, obviously, I haven't had a child, but it says in there that when a woman gives birth to a son, she's unclean for 7 days. But then when it says if she gives birth to a daughter, she's unclean for 14 days. I don't know. Don't ask me to explain that. Maybe ask Pastor Ben if he's still here. I don't get it. I don't know. But in my experience, I think that, girls are way messier than boys, so maybe that's part of it. I don't know. Could be boys are messier. I raised boys, but it seems like every time Kathy goes out of town and it's just me, the house is pretty clean. But then she comes home, there's suitcases everywhere. It's like, oh my goodness. So I'm a little confused by that one. Others maybe confuse me a little bit, or they just kind of gross me out. I want to read you one of those from chapter 13. If someone has an open sore on their head or in their beard, the priest shall examine the disease. If it is deeper than the skin and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an itch, an infectious disease. I'm not sure what's going on there either, but I don't want to see any of your nasty diseases or sores, okay? I think, again, Pastor Ben is the pastor to go to for those kind of things. So go show those to him. If you come to me, I talk and brag about how as a corpsman I take care of things. Probably today I'll just snap a picture of it, put it on Facebook or Instagram. But that's how Leviticus kind of feels to a lot of people. It's kind of weird, kind of gross. It's just, and it's hard. It doesn't make sense all the time. It doesn't really feel very helpful in today's day and age. But maybe it's because we don't understand it. We haven't dug deep enough, maybe. So back to the question. Is Leviticus objectively weird, or is it just how we see it in our 21st century kind of Western entitled elitist mindset? Is that how we see it? One of these two things is probably true or more true than the other, but this is where we got to make a decision. Is it just weird and we can just disregard it altogether? Or do we need to kind of change the way we're thinking? Or do we need to change the way we look at it? You see, the events of Leviticus took place 3,500 years ago. Now, I can't count very high unless I take my shoes off, but that's a long time ago, isn't it? 3,500 years ago. And when we read something that old, it's really important for us to be aware of something called chronological snobbery. Chronological snobbery. If you guys would say that with me 10 times really fast, okay? Chronological snobbery. And this is what, let me just read it to you. The uncritical acceptance of the intellectual climate common to our own age and the assumption that whatever has gone out of date is on that account discredited. Now that's from C.S. Lewis, and he's very eloquent, and those are great words, and I'm sure many of you understand it. But for my tiny brain, what that means is that all the people that were from a long time ago were stupid. And we got it all figured out, right? They just don't know what's up. They didn't have a clue what was going on. And we know they were really dumb, we're really smart. That's kind of what I think that means. So you can be a chronological snob about anything. Look at past worldviews. Oh my gosh, what were they thinking about that? You know, the wall, why would they build a wall? The old wall, not the new wall, all right? But you could be a chronological snob about how people did their hair. All right? This is a new hairdo. My brain's getting bigger, and I just keep doing it up higher. But back in the 80s, they had big poofy hair and those parachute pants that kind of went whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. I think some of you wear them today still, I think. But why would they do that? Why would they wear clothes like that? Why would they do their hair like that? I did not have. I had a nice hairdo, but someone said it was similar to a mullet. I don't know. Why would they do that? But we are like that, and it's easy for us to kind of go to that way of thinking, isn't it? You just think about it this way. How many of you have listened to old music and think, oh, that's terrible? You know, why would we do these things? When we are deep in our own chronological snobbery, when we are at our best at it, we tend to get lost and forget about that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, people are going to look back at us. And they're going to go, wait, what were those people thinking? Oh my gosh, why would all the boys have short, buzzy haircuts and the girls have long hair? Why would they do that? What is the deal with that? Oh my God, why would they? Did you see the pictures of them people holding their cell phones? Do you know how dirty your cell phone is? Okay? And then you put it to your face? Right? And I know, well, I'm assuming a lot of you do your reading in the bathroom, so to speak, right? Do you know how gross that is? And then you put it to your face again? That's what they're thinking. They're thinking, why didn't they just get the brain chip? And then they just think of a phone call and it happens, you know? They're going to judge us from their perspective, just like we judge people from our perspective, from way, way back. Especially, we need to look at one thing, especially when we're reading anything at all. We learn this in junior high or high school for some of us, maybe for college for some of you, but when we're reading anything, context is everything. especially when we're talking about something as old as Leviticus, 3,500 years ago, when the world was very, very different than our world. I mean, we have, my son's sitting right here in the front row, and I guarantee he thinks he's way smarter than I am looking back at me, right? We can kind of look back, but the older he gets, the more he realizes how smart I am. But we always have this chronological snobbery happening everywhere. We got to look at their time, 3,500 years ago. It was a lot different for them. They were in little bands and tribes, and they were nomadic. They wandered all over the countryside, the world. They had to follow the water. They had to follow the vegetation. They hadn't figured out how to plant crops yet. They hadn't figured out how to build big cities yet. So there's just these nomadic tribes wandering around. Some of them were hunter-gatherers. Some of them were herders. But all of these tribes, there were several different tribes. They all had their own customs and traditions and things that they did and the way they did things. They just kind of followed the water and the vegetation. Now, they lived in tents because they had to be portable. They had to be able to move. Sometimes these tribes would interact a little bit, maybe good interactions, maybe bad interactions. Sometimes they fought over, resources, water, food, things like that. But every tribe was its own community. And each community, they were so tight and had to be careful with how they lived. When it came to marriage, they would marry from within their tribe. There's only so many women in a tribe, right? And you end up marrying your cousin or your second cousin. Now, a lot of us kind of think about that and look, there's a lot of jokes I could throw out there, but I'm not going to go there. We're live on TV, But it's weird to us, right? From our perspective, why would you marry your cousin? But because we don't fully appreciate how life was back then, how dangerous and how harsh it was, and what they had to do to survive. So we know from archaeological evidence that 3,500 years ago, there was a huge drought. Things got really, really bad for these nomadic tribes. So what do? They're starving to death. They're hanging by a thread. They don't know what to do. But then they hear that there is food and water in Egypt. So these bands and tribes all head towards Egypt. And they get there. And it's great at first. The Egyptians actually accept them in. They have a name for them. It's called Habiru. And it just means outsider, foreigner. But even though all these tribes were different and had their own kind of thing going on, different worldviews, the Egyptians kind of lumped them all together into this Habiru. Even though the reason they did that was because they all arrived at the same time. They kind of all looked the same. They kind of all dressed the same. They kind of all smelled the same, I guess. But in the Egyptian historical records, at first, they bring these people in. Come on in. And they became laborers and workers, and they built their cities, and they did, they dug their ditches and their trenches and all. They did all the jobs that they didn't want to do. And it was great for the Egyptians. They loved it. Come on in. They were welcomed. Now, the Habiru settled there for a long time, and the famine and the drought ended. They'd been there for so long that they decided, this is good. We're chill. We're going to stay right here. We're going to hang out with the Egyptians and do what we got to do. And that was great. The Egyptians are, you guys can stay, no big deal. But then the Egyptian economy started to falter, started to fail, and things got rough for the Egyptians. So then they start to look at these Habiru and start to come up with other names and started to call them, in the historical records, you can see they documented this stuff like these parasites, these infidels, these people are less than human. Why don't we just turn them into slaves? Now, instead of being, workers and being part of the community, they're slaves. And they live like this for hundreds of years. They are just slaves of the Egyptians. And it's about this time in our scriptures that God tells Moses. God goes and finds Moses and says, hey, lead the Habiru out of slavery in Egypt into the land of their own. Now, some of you, some light bulbs are popping like, hey, Habiru, let my people go kind of thing. That's the Egyptian people. The Hebrew people. These Habiru are our spiritual ancestors that were slaves in Egypt. Habiru. But it wasn't until God called them out of Egypt, called them away from slavery to become a people, a separate, not a bunch of separate tribes and bands, but one people, a free people, a chance to become their own free nation. So they all combined into the Hebrew nation. That's amazing, right? Moses said, let my people go. He told the Pharaoh, hey, if you don't let them go, this is going to happen or this is going to happen and all that. He chased them out of town kind of at the end, trying to get them back. But Leviticus was written because living free was way harder than living as a slave. Now think about this. These are generation after generation after generation of slaves living there, and they have forgotten all about how to be herders and hunter-gatherers and all that stuff. So here they are. They're running around in the wilderness with Moses. Moses has promised them this promised land, and because they did some stuff, they were just kind of wandering for a little while. And out of this context of fear, they're like, you know what? Why don't we just go back? Let's go back to being slaves. Let's go back to what we know. And that's because of fear. Leviticus was written as a ray of hope, a way forward, a way to survive and to thrive. So you got to look at Leviticus in a different way. It was a way to build this new, free life together. Let me give you a little example from the scriptures, chapter 18. Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, where you lived, and you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan, to which I am bringing you. You shall not follow their laws. My ordinances you shall observe, and my laws you shall keep. I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my laws and my ordinances. By doing so, one shall live. I am the Lord. Now, from our 2019 perspective, looking back and reading that, we can look at that and maybe even kind of think like, wow, when God talks like that, our minds kind of automatically go to this brutal divine dictator who kind of needs and who wants them to obey him. But listen, did you catch that end part where it says, by doing these things in this way, you shall live? That's such an important part of this Bible or of this book. You got to catch that. In spite of what you may heard, that this is all weird and crazy, Leviticus is a love story. It's a love story about a God who wants his people to live long and live happy, healthy, thriving lives. He wants them to thrive, not just survive. That's what this book was written for. And I know from our perspective, and we look at all that stuff, and it's like, what the heck's he talking about? In their day and age, his priorities were life, health, and holiness. 3,500 years ago, life, health, and holiness. And then today, has that changed for us? I don't know. We're going to talk about all of these things over the next few weeks. But today, I want to talk about the health for a minute, our physical well-being. Now, if you've ever read Leviticus all the way through, you know that there's this reoccurring theme of clean and unclean. Things are clean, some things are unclean. These foods are okay, these foods are unclean. That's okay, that's not. This is clean, that's unclean. Skin diseases that are okay, some that are just nasty. And remember, those are the ones you want to show Pastor Ben. So there's some mold that's okay to be in your house, but there's some mold that means if you got this kind of mold, get out and burn that house down. This is in the book. And Leviticus outlines all of this. We judge this as old and irrelevant, but have you ever mucked out a house that's been hit by a hurricane or a flood? Been in some of these homes that have been destroyed recently by these tornadoes and tried to help them clean up? There are 2 chapters in Leviticus about mold. This is real stuff, right? This is stuff for us today. We understand this, don't we? There are certain things, where we look at it that in this language of clean and unclean can kind of rub us the wrong way. But if you realize it and think about it, we do the exact same thing today. We keep things separate, don't we? You don't mix the dog food with the cat food, right? You don't mix things that shouldn't be. You don't take your dinner with your cell phone into the bathroom and eat dinner while you're on the pot, right? We don't do that. You eat dinner at the dinner table. Those things are to be separate. You don't take the toilet brush when you're done scrubbing away and go do the dishes with them, do you? Well, some of you do, but don't. You don't take the toothbrush and rub it in the toilet when your dad's not home, do you? I don't know if that's ever. Now he's laughing. I think it has happened. We don't do these things. These are things we keep separate, right? there are some things we just don't mix. Some things that are clean and unclean because it's gross. We have years and years of living, generation after generation after generation, where we look back and we use history, we use science, we use these things to understand, hey, those gross things back there will kill you. And those gross things back there will still kill you today. People who buck that system, people who try to be like above the law, so to speak, will pay the price. What I mean by that, some of you may have been on our trips to Nicaragua, and you go overseas and you help over there, you help build neighborhoods, things like that. There are rules. There's briefings about wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Then when you're done washing your hands, grab the hand sanitizer and use that. Stay clean. Don't eat the certain foods over there. Don't eat this. Don't drink that. Well, there's this one guy. Some of you may remember him, Chris Sands. He used to be a pastor here. He went on a trip to Nicaragua with Pastor Aaron, and Aaron was telling us a story about how they sat down to eat one day. And Chris thinks he's a little bit above the law or above the rules, and he's eating. Part of his sandwich drops on the ground, and to their horror, he reaches down, picks it up, pops it in. He's like, I got an iron stomach. Okay, whatever. A few hours later, that iron stomach kind of liquefied and started coming out both ends for a few days. So that's what I'm saying. These rules and lies were made and meant to bring health and life and safety. That's why God tells us to be careful with clean and unclean things. There's a reason, there's a plan. Some skin diseases could spread and take out a whole family or wipe out a whole village. You know, Leviticus even says a little bit, or not a little bit, but a lot about sex in there. And in today's, or our viewpoint of this, and we react to these things in our open 2019 worldview of how everything's okay, but to those people, they were fighting for survival. So any sexual behavior that would endanger their community was not cool at all. Don't sleep with your neighbor's wife. Why? Because it's going to cause a fight. Someone's going to get mad. And then two of our bravest warriors are going to get in a fight, and one of you is going to die. We're going to lose a warrior. We're going to lose a hunter. We may even lose a mother or a father. And as our tribes survive based on the number of people we have and the food and the water that we have, we cannot afford to lose a single person. The food laws there were there to keep people healthy and safe. Almost every animal that they told them not to eat, or God told them not to eat, was a bottom feeder. You guys know what bottom feeders are, right? In this day and age, we talk about, they said, eat any bird you want except a buzzard. Ever seen a buzzard and what they eat? Usually roadkill, some rotten nastiness. You know, eat whatever you want, but don't eat those. Pork. We know how to handle pork today. It's good to go, right? But have you ever really thought about a pig and what they eat? Do you know that whatever you throw in the pen, they'll eat it? They'll eat anything. They just grub it all up, down to the bone even. They eat the bones and everything. They're not all this cute, cuddly, what is that, babe pig in a city? They're not all this cute pig that talks. They're nasty. They will eat anything, and it's gross. We understand how to handle pork. You cook it till it's slightly pink, and you're good to go, right? No, I'm just kidding. You want to cook the pork all the way through. Make sure you're safe. But even today, pigs are disgusting. What about shrimp? How many of you love shrimp? Shellfish out there. Yeah? Everybody raise your hands. Hey, I tell you to Google it and see how they eat. All right? They are another bottom feeder. They are the pigs of the ocean. They will eat anything. They grub it up. But we take it, we clean them, we eat them, and we love it. So when we look at Leviticus, it was kind of like one of the first medical journals ever written. There's really, and we don't like to admit it, but there's a little bit of scientific data in there that still makes sense to today. Don't do this, don't do that. And the reason why all these laws mattered, the reason God wanted these people to live and to thrive, is because he had a plan for them. He had a huge plan for them. If you go back to Genesis, we talked about this a few weeks ago about Abraham and Sarah and how God promised them that they would be the father, or he would be the father of nations. Look at the stars and see all the stars. You're going to have children way more than the stars. He said that you're going to make a great nation that's going to be a blessing to the entire world. And part of that plan was freeing the Habiru, the Hebrew nation, the slaves in Egypt. Think about it this way. They learned to live a different way. They learned to be healthy and holy. And eventually, in that community, they gave birth to Jesus. So think about it that way. Without Abraham, we don't have Moses. Without Moses, we don't have Leviticus. And without Leviticus, we don't have Jesus. And if we don't have Jesus, we're not here today. So God had a plan. God had a purpose. And it's best if we're healthy enough to fulfill God's call and purpose on our lives. I feel kind of a little self-conscious to be up here telling you, hey, eat better, eat healthier. I wore the jacket today to kind of hide a little bit of my unhealthiness, okay? I have redundant tissue, is what one person told me. So I got to say that we as Christians, we may have missed the mark a little bit. We rarely talk about salvation having to do with your body. We focus on the heart and the soul, and that's great. We need to do that. We have to have a clean heart and a clean soul. But Jesus didn't just heal souls, he healed bodies. Because for God, matter matters. He said, I have come to restore creation. I have come to redeem and restore all of your body, all of you, body and soul. Your body is important. Maybe a lot more pastors need to stand on stage and tell people, you need to get on a treadmill and get your body right with God. Way too many pastors say, get on your knees and get your heart right, and that's great, get with God, but what about our body? Now listen to me, I'm not talking about our body in a way that it's all about being slimmer and sexier and more fit, and it's not about leaning into the idolatry of image or anything like that. It's about honoring God with what he's entrusted you with physically. And this will be different for each and every one of us. God, and I say this all the time, God has a plan for your life. God had a plan for my life. When I said 20 years ago earlier, but it's probably more like 30 years ago, had I taken better care of my body, I'd be retiring from the NFL. I really do believe that. I let my body get out of shape, and now I'm not in the NFL. But God had a better plan. He wanted me here today with you. So Paul put it this way. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you? As followers, as disciples of Christ, the Holy Spirit is in our body, whom you have received from God. You are not your own. You were bought at a price. For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son. You remember that one? You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. Now, God had plans for the Hebrew people, a plan that would change the course of human history. And sometimes we stop right there. God saved the Jews. God got them out of Egypt. But who are we to say that God's plan ended there or stopped there? God has a plan for each and every one of our lives. And that plan is for us to be influencers of the people who we are around each and every day. We influence them by the way we live our lives. What would Leviticus look like for you today? Not 3,500 years ago, but what would the rules of Leviticus to live and honor God be for you today? What shalt thou not do? Thou shalt not eat 6 tacos in a single setting. Thou shalt not think about fitness as fitting this whole pizza in my mouth, right? Thou shalt not binge watch 8 hours straight of Netflix. I do it. I know, I've done it on a weekend. I'm tired and I'm watching Netflix. Cat's like, I'm going for a walk. Okay, see ya. I need to get up, get out there, walk. Thou shalt not binge watch Netflix for 8 hours. Now, God has plans, or had plans for the Hebrew people, but he does have a plan for our lives. And as your pastor, it is on me to encourage you to be healthier, stronger, cleaner, not just spiritually, but physically. And I really do feel weird talking about this because I'm not physically fit. I'm not in shape. And I think my boys told me before, rounds of shape, I get that, right? But you got to try. You got to get out there. I ride a bike. I walk. I hike. I do the things I can do. But we need to do this, not just spiritually and physically, but because we honor God with our bodies. We honor God with our bodies, and we're more likely to honor God with our lives so that we can feel his presence and lead others to do the same thing. That's what we're all called to do. When you're disciplined about what goes into your body, when you're committed to making the right choice over and over again, when you're committed to doing the right thing over and over again, it's kind of like this, making a decision to either go to bed at 10:30 or go to bed at 2:30 in the morning because you were Netflixing, right? You know that there's a difference of how you feel and how you perform the next day when you go to bed at 10:30 versus 2:30, right? You understand that our choices have consequences. Body and soul are not separated. They are intertwined, and God cares about both of them. God has a plan for what we do with both. The healthier and the stronger and the cleaner and holier and happier we become, the more fully you will see God's plan in your life. And you will reflect that light into others' lives. That's our mission. We are called to lead people to an active faith in Jesus Christ. And I kind of stress active. It's not just about leading them to church or leading them to Christ. We need to be active in our lives and how we represent Christ. That's one of the underlying themes of the hidden gem of our Bible. That's the part of the weird genius of the book of Leviticus. And today we just kind of dipped our toe into it. And over the next few weeks, we're going to learn even more about God and about our Bible and how it relates to us and others. And for today, that is the good news. For today, that is the good news, because you can take what you've heard today and go into this world and make disciples. And go and be different. Go and be the light of Christ in this world. Would you guys pray with me?